The motion be agreed to. The Right Honourable Chris Hipkins.
Mr Speaker, I move that all the words after that be deleted and replaced with "This House has no confidence in this coalition government because under its incompetent, arrogant, shambolic and divisive leadership, New Zealand is going backwards, Kiwis are losing their jobs, record numbers are leaving the country, and their priorities are wrong and out of touch." Mr Speaker, Kiwis looking for some hope from the Prime Minister at the beginning of this year would be disappointed by that contribution. If that is the best the government has to offer, it's going to be a very long year for the National Party backbench, as evidenced by the fact that you could see them pulling out their phones after only a few minutes and frantically dusting up their CVs. The fact that they've given up already, Mr Speaker, is a real warning sign for this government. But New Zealanders were looking for more. A realisation from this government that despite all the big talk last year, it's still getting harder for New Zealand families. It's still getting harder for New Zealand businesses. An acknowledgement from this government that they have driven New Zealand into the worst economic recession since 1991 might have been a good place to start. An acknowledgement that the deepest cuts to government spending since 1991 made that situation so much worse than it needed to be would also have been a good place to start. New Zealanders were looking for the government to finally step up and take responsibility for their own actions and the consequences of them, but they would have been disappointed by that. Because the government won't take responsibility for the choices that it has been making. All governments have choices, and this government has been making the wrong ones. $2.9 billion in tax cuts for landlords because they promised rents were going to go down. What's happened? Rents have continued to go up under this government. $200 million in tax cuts for tobacco companies while our health system descends further into crisis. $14 billion in tax cuts the country simply could not afford. Slashing affordable water reforms leading to record rates increases up and down the country. Underfunding sectors like early childhood education, which sees parents paying higher fees every week to send their kids into ECE. Scaling back and stopping new public house builds. What's resulted in that? Builders, plumbers, electricians and tradies losing their jobs at a time when we desperately need more houses to be built in New Zealand. Pausing and cancelling major infrastructure projects, which means some of our most skilled workers have given up already and left the country. Record numbers giving up and leaving the country is one of the early legacies of this government. All governments have choices, this government's making the wrong ones. A government that promised to get New Zealand back on track has derailed the New Zealand economy. And you don't just have to take my word for that. Look at the HSBC's estimates that said New Zealand's economy had the largest contraction in GDP last year in the world. The economists that previously called us the rock star economy have pointed out we took the biggest hit in the world in 2024. Forget the rock star economy. Nicola Willis is aiming for rock bottom, Mr Speaker. Businesses can see that the government has derailed the economy. According to the Reserve Bank, who suddenly the government want to claim all the credit for, business investment will be lower at the end of this year than at the end of our last Labor government. That is the early legacy of this national government. We see businesses every week going to the wall as company liquidations continue to go through the roof. Companies that survived COVID can't survive national. That is what this government are doing for the New Zealand economy. And Kiwis are just getting more hollow words and rhetoric from this government. No real action on power prices, on groceries, on rates, or on transport costs. In the real world, that's the world where people who aren't wealthy and sorted continue to face prices that climb, insurance that goes up, rates that are increasing, energy bills increasing, transport costs increasing. Kiwis are struggling, and this government is busy telling them it's all okay, it's getting better, when those New Zealanders know it's not getting better, it's getting harder. And all they're getting from the Prime Minister is more words. He's like a walking Dale Carnegie seminar, Mr. Speaker. He spent the last year talking about the cost of living crisis. New Zealanders are still waiting for the fix. He spent the last year talking about growing the economy, and all he did was prove that talking about growing the economy doesn't actually grow the economy. New Zealanders want to see that this government has a plan, and so far this government has proven they don't have one. Mr. Speaker, actually, Christopher Luxon does have a good idea. He's decided that the person who drove the New Zealand economy into the deepest recession in nearly 35 years should be tasked with economic growth. The person who made everything so much worse for New Zealanders is apparently Christopher Luxon's magical solution to New Zealand's lack of economic growth. What she doesn't realise, and what Christopher Luxon doesn't realise, is that Nicola Willis's austerity agenda is utterly incompatible with raising living standards for all New Zealanders. Because it's not just about growing the economy, but what we grow and how we grow it actually matters as well. And that's a discussion this government aren't willing to have, because this is the most hard-right neoliberal government New Zealand has seen in a generation. They are following the typical right-wing playbook. Defund public services so that they struggle. Defund public services so that they are destabilised and New Zealanders get dissatisfied. And we know what comes next: privatisation. Because that is what they have done for the last 40 years, and that is exactly the playbook that we are seeing now. Underfund public services, run them into the ground, cut them and hock them off. That is what this government wants to do. How did that work for the railways? When they sold it off, it got assets stripped by its private owners, and the taxpayers ended up having to buy it back and bail it out. How did that work with the power companies? Well, if you're a shareholder in the power companies, pretty well, actually, because they are gouging New Zealand consumers every day gouging New Zealand consumers under this privatised model introduced by the last national government, who said that more competition would lead to lower power prices. How's that working out for New Zealanders so far now? And they are now promising more of the same. How about the botched transmission gully public-private partnership, which ultimately meant the private sector took all the money and the public covered all of the risk in the transmission gully supposed public-private partnership? Instead, all we get from Christopher Luxon is more hollow words. No real action on dealing with the lack of competition in New Zealand. Here's some news for those members opposite. Competitive free markets require rules. Cutting red tape, cutting regulation actually helps the monopolies. It doesn't help everyday New Zealanders. When they talk about cutting red tape, they're actually talking about cutting protection for consumers. They're actually talking about making it easier for the monopolies to gouge consumers more rather than protecting everyday New Zealand consumers. And instead, we're now seeing, once again, that tired old rhetoric from the right about privatising assets. Now, I remember, and our hospitals, of course, are first in the firing line. I remember back in the 1990s going to hospital with a member of my own family, and before we could even get through the door, they had to write out a cheque for the care that was about to be delivered, because the National Party decided a privatised user pays model was going to be more efficient. How did that work out? We on this side of the House believe that your access to healthcare should not be determined by how wealthy you are, which is the view on the other side of the House. Whether you live or die should not be determined by your bank balance, which seems to be the view on the other side of the House. If privatising health is so great, why is it that the privatised American health system costs more per person than just about any other health system in the world and yet delivers worse health outcomes? That seems to be the system that they want to mimic. But once again, don't just take my word for it. Just last year, the Commonwealth Fund studied 10 health systems around the world, including New Zealand, Australia, the UK and the US. They found that privatised health systems came in last for administrative efficiency. New Zealand was third. We actually, according to them, had quite an efficient system. What does this government want to do? They want to mimic the worst of the health systems across the world and think that that's going to deliver better outcomes. But this government don't like evidence and they don't like facts. Because let's be clear, this is a government that is more interested in entrenching privilege than supporting everyday New Zealanders. Because David Seymour, our future Deputy Prime Minister, gives speeches where he rails against two standards of citizenship, then delivers a speech where he said the country's divided into two tribes, according to David Seymour, the rich and the mediocre. That is the view of David Seymour, our future Deputy Prime Minister, and it reflects the views of this government. The people that work hard every day are mediocre losers. We know that. Andrew Bailey gave us a hint of that last year, and now David Seymour is reinforcing it. That the people who choose to teach, the people who choose to be nurses, the people who choose to become police, the people who enter the Defence Force, they're mediocre, according to this government. Those with disabilities, mediocre, according to this government.
Point of order, the Honourable David Seymour.
Mr. Speaker, to completely misrepresent what someone has said in a way that reflects badly on, for example, the police of this country, I think brings this House into disrepute, and he should withdraw the comment.
This so far has been quite a robust debate. I would have interrupted it earlier, but I noticed that most of the additional comment coming from the floor of the House was coming from the government's own side, so I didn't then. And I think one of the points about this is that there will be things that are said that are debatable. I'm not about to rule on every little point that upsets everybody in the House. The Right Honourable Chris Hipkins. Point of order, the Right Honourable Mr. Peters.
There are some of us who think that the standards of this House have seriously declined. Now, when you're giving a ruling, it is not right for a Member of Parliament to stand there impatiently waiting for you to stop. That shows no respect for you or this institution. So I would ask you to check what Mr. Hipkins just did and tell him not to behave like that in the future.
Yes, please remain in your seat until you're called. Right Honourable Chris Hipkins.
Well, point of order, Mr. Speaker. Generally, members stand when they wish to be called.
Yes, but I was actually ruling. So technically, you were just a bit ahead of the gun, as it were.
Oh, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is just the enthusiasm that we have on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker. Because on this side of the House, we actually oppose the government's view that you should entrench the rights of people who have wealth to the detriment of people who don't, which is clearly the agenda of the ACT Party, and it is now going to be the agenda of this government as well. Mr. Speaker, this government's done a lot of punching down over the last year, but they have demonstrated they have no plan to lift New Zealand up. Mr. Speaker, this is a government who believe that New Zealanders who work hard for a living are mediocre. That is David Seymour's position, and it is the position of this government. Let's talk about David Seymour's regulatory standards bill. A bill that says there should be two levels of rights in New Zealand, rights for those who have wealth and lesser rights for those who don't have wealth. That is the position of the ACT Party, but don't just take my word for it. Even Roger Douglas thinks that that is now the position of the modern day ACT Party, that their goal in politics is to entrench privilege rather than provide opportunity for New Zealanders. Those aren't just my words. Roger Douglas, the founder of the ACT Party, now believes that that is the ACT Party's mission in this Parliament. Well, I can tell you now, the Regulatory Standards Bill is a bill that has no place in this House. And I can guarantee you this, in the first 100 days of the next Labor government, it will be repealed. Because on this side of the House, we believe that responsible regulation is about protecting New Zealanders, protecting all New Zealanders, not just those with a healthy bank balance, which seems to be the position on the other side of the House. Mr. Speaker, this is not a government working for everyday New Zealanders who are working hard to get ahead. Right. Christopher Luxon says the bottom line is that we should say no less and yes a lot more. What did they say to delivering new inter-island ferries? No. What did they say to delivering a new Dunedin hospital? No. What did they say to delivering affordable water reform? No. What did they say to delivering new state housing? What did they say to delivering school classroom upgrades? No. What did they say to delivering improved infrastructure for the country? No. What did they say yes to, Mr. Speaker? That's probably a bigger question, because they have said yes to a few things. 13,000 more kids living in poverty, they said yes to that. Scrapping all meaningful action on climate change, they said yes to that. Higher unemployment, they said yes to that. Cuts to support for people with disabilities, they said yes to that. Higher public transport costs, they said yes to that. Tax breaks for tobacco companies, they said yes to that. Suppressing wage growth, they said a very big yes to that. And slashing regional manufacturing jobs, they said yes to that. No action from the government to turn any of those things around. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister now thinks that more tourism is going to be the answer for New Zealand. He does know quite a lot about tourism, though. In fact, he visited Te Puke so many times he forgot he's actually in Hawaii. But Mr. Speaker, they cut funding for promoting tourism in last year's budget. They hiked up the international visitor levy and then gouged that money back out of tourism once again. Now they suddenly think that more tourists is the answer. When one of our biggest tourist destinations, Queenstown, is saying that they're going to have to stop all development because their infrastructure can't cope. So not only did the government grind infrastructure to a halt, it's now saying it wants to cram more people in and put the infrastructure that already can't cope under even more pressure.
That is their doing.
They say they want science. They want more investment in science. They cut $500 million of investment from science in last year's budget. 500 science and research jobs have been cut. Take GNS, the Institute of Geological and Nuclear Sciences. They cut 59 science jobs, including scientists, geologists, geophysicists, geochemists, the sorts of jobs that we need more of in New Zealand. Take NIWA, climate research, 90 jobs down the drain under this government. Now, I also do want to mention road cones, Mr. Speaker, because it seems, according to the Prime Minister, that road cones are the thing holding the New Zealand economy back. Or more to the point, health and safety is holding the New Zealand economy back. Well, let's put a few facts on the table, facts that this government won't like. New Zealand has 5 times the fatality rate at work of the United Kingdom, twice the rate of Australia. And yet this government seemed to think that health and safety is the problem. 5,000 to 6,000 hospitalisations in New Zealand happen every year because of injury and illness caused by work. Health and safety is not too high a price to pay. Knowing that someone is going to go home at the end of the day is not too high a price to pay. Work should not kill people and it should not make them sick. That is not too high a price to pay, Mr Speaker, and I think before the government go gutting health and safety regulation and rules that are designed to ensure that Kiwis can be healthy at work and make it home at the end of the day, they should understand why those rules were put in place in the first place. Because actually, most of them were put in place under the last national government, who recognised that people shouldn't die at work and that our rate of workplace death and injuries is far too high. Mr Speaker, too many New Zealanders are giving up hope and leaving the country. They were looking to Christopher Luxon and this government for hope. They will have seen none in the last week. But there is reason to be optimistic, Mr Speaker. We can look around the world and we can see the worst in the world, or we can look around the world and we can see opportunity and we can see what New Zealand could be. We could be an international powerhouse for renewable energy, where renewable energy is a competitive advantage for New Zealand. We could be investing in our future now, rather than cutting and delivering austerity, which is what Nicola Willis and this government are delivering. Mr Speaker, things can be better here in New Zealand. We can have a government that wants to back New Zealanders rather than a government that's all about entrenching privilege, helping out their mates and making the wrong choices. We can have a government that wants to see the New Zealand economy grow and get Kiwis back to work, but grow in a way where everybody benefits, not just those at the top, which is all this government has been focused on. New Zealanders deserve better from this government. They deserved hope and they haven't been given any.